Path of Exile 2 has been in early access for just about 3 days now, and I have played a lot, quite a bit, frankly, since it came out. And I figure I'm at the stage where I'm able to take a good step back, take a breath, and evaluate the things I like and the things that I think need some work. I'll say overall, I'm having a great time with Path of Exile 2. It's been a kind of a nice change of pace compared to the other ARPGs that are on the market that I've enjoyed. Obviously, PoE 1 being my sort of bread and butter ARPG. But that being said, while I'm having a very good time, I think there's still quite a few things that need work. And because we're in the early access stage, that is kind of the point. We should provide some feedback to GGG so they can make changes. So I'm going to go through the good here, and then the needs work, and then we'll kick off. So the first thing is under the good is the environment. I think the environmental cohesion from zone to zone is very, very strong. It feels really good moving from act to act. I think the monsters kind of fit their zones really well. The actual environmental detail is crazy. I don't know if you ever zoomed in on any of the zones, literally zoomed your mouse wheel in and looked, but it feels amazingly detailed, and that level of detail really immerses you in that world. I think Path of Exile 2 does an incredible job of that. So that's the first thing. Secondly, is skill visuals. Skills look really, really good. I don't know if you compare things like Spark, which is something you get very, very early as a sorcerer, which is what I'm playing. I'm playing a Stormweaver. You get Spark very early. Spark is beautiful compared to the way it looks in PoE 1. It is night and day. It's hard to even compare. But the skills visually look really good. They sound really good. I should put this on here. The sound design in PoE 2 is incredible. The music is fantastic. They did a really, really good job with that. And on the same note, the characters and the stories are really, really, really cohesive. I very much enjoyed all of the dialogue and the kind of little quips that your character makes when they're going through different areas. I thought that worked out really nicely. Path of Exile 1 has some of that, but it's not nearly as commonplace as it is in PoE 2, and I think they did a really good job with that. The next thing is combat. So combat, I think mostly feels nice. This is going to be something that honestly I think you either like or you don't. I was a little skeptical coming into PoE 2 about the combat, the combos, the pacing, etc. But it's actually felt pretty good to me, better than I was expecting it to. The combos, generally speaking, feel pretty impactful and they feel pretty fluid when you do it. That's not the case for every single combo, right? There's some that feel a little clunky and those don't feel good. But I think conceptually it's working. There's just some tweaking that needs to occur for some specific skills to make them feel a little smoother, like some animation time speed up, things like that. But on the whole, I do like it. I do think that the combat is very strategically engaging in a good way. I think the monster moves are for the most part well telegraphed. There are some boss abilities that feel a little bit gotcha-y, for lack of a better word. They kind of they get you. But generally speaking, I feel the combat is very impactful, and I feel that my decisions have a very direct correlation on exactly what happens on screen. I can dodge things cleanly. I can drop a combo when it makes sense. My actions feel like they have the appropriate impact most of the time is what I'll say. Versus in PoE 1, right, where you're just kind of firing nonstop into the void, things just kind of get you and you don't really have a great picture of what happened. I think PoE 2, generally speaking, you know what happened. Again, there are some things that are exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, I think it's working out pretty well. That being said, if you really like the sped up gameplay, PoE 2 is just, I don't think it's just that type of game, which I kind of think you kind of have to have a little bit of a break and say, this is not going to be PoE 1, this is not going to be that type of combat. It's going to be a little different. So if you like that kind of thing, then I think you'll like it. I think they do a good job. Okay, the next thing is boss fights. Boss fights are fantastic. I love the boss fights. I think generally speaking, they are so cool, and killing the last boss of Act 3, which I won't say for spoilers' sake, felt very good. It felt like I felt like I achieved something, which I think is really, they've talked about that a number of times, that bosses should feel good, and they do. I think they really killed it with the bosses. There are, again, some fights that have some mechanics that are a little weird. For example, one of the ultimatum bosses is maybe the worst design fight I've ever seen in my entire life playing PoE. I can't remember the name of it, but he flies all over the arena. It's just silly. It's just silly. That one needs to be completely removed or completely redesigned. It just doesn't work. But generally, the bosses are really, really good and really tight. I don't know what happened with that one. The next thing is the endgame concept. So I'm relatively early into endgame, but I will say conceptually, I like the way it feels. I think that The endless atlas seems to make sense. The little zones where everything is kind of, has something innately in the zone, and you can see like this zone has expedition, and this one has a boss, and this one has, breach, whatever. I like that, and you can kind of like choose which way to go. I think that the waystone system is generally speaking pretty good. I will say I'm kind of feeling the effects of not having alts and not having scours and things like that, because you can't re-roll mods that you don't like. In the early stages, that's much more impactful than it is in the later stages. Granted, you can seemingly infinitely buy tier 1 waystones from the vendor if you want to, but on the whole, I would like to kind of be able to re-roll my my maps a little bit easier than having to like chaos spam them to remove a single mod or whatever, maybe annulling, I guess. But either way, I think as a whole, the endgame concept is fun, and I like the kind of infinite atlas that's been laid out to us. I don't know if I like it more than the PoE 1 atlas, but I do think it works, and I like it as an endgame system. And the last thing under the good that I really enjoyed is the skill gems. So skill gems, I was a little skeptical of how this was going to work. I was just kind of unconvinced about, PoE 1, frankly, needing a skill gem rework. I get that it's a little bit cumbersome, but I didn't think it was bad just because it's cumbersome. But I actually think I really like the PoE 2 one. I don't think it would work in PoE 1, but I think in PoE 2 it feels pretty nice. And leveling up that skill gem, finding that, uncut skill gem that's a level up from yours is very satisfying feeling. So I think that that's something they can roll with in the long term. So I'm pro I'm pro PoE 2 skill gem. I've enjoyed it. Now, that's the good. And I think there's, while it is less in number, these are all very good things. And I think that it has laid a fantastic foundation for PoE 2, which again, I'm really enjoying and still enjoying right now. But that being said, there are quite a few things that need some work. So the first one and the number one thing, in my opinion, is loot. So this has been said by several other creators, but loot just needs more. I think that this is going to solve a lot of problems. It's the bottleneck around loot is kind of causing cascading issues throughout the rest of the game. So obviously people keep quoting the, if we haven't made you feel that you can craft in the campaign, then we failed. Well, we need more crafting materials in the campaign. We need more crafting materials in the whole game. It should be raining crafting materials if the game is going to be the challenging game that it seems to want to be. We need, I genuinely think, 5 times the amount of exalted orbs that are dropping. Like, I should be slamming constantly to keep up my gear. Regals are way too uncommon, and the problem is we don't have rare drops, rare loot, yellows dropping to support the regal farm, because theoretically, if you find a yellow loot that you don't want and you vendor it, then you can get a regal shard. But the problem is we're not getting enough of those rare drops to sustain regals. So it's really just like, it's bottlenecking in multiple places. So here's how I would start with this. First, I would, again, literally just 5x the amount of crafting currency that's dropping across the board. I genuinely think 5x seems like a lot, but I think giving it a 500% increased chance to find all of these given things that make sense on, on the act by act basis. So like, I should be finding 5 times the exalts, 5 times the transmutes, 5 times the augs. I have been spending exalts constantly. I've been spending regals constantly, and I've never had more than like 10 in the bank. And because I'm so low, I don't feel that I can spend them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, every time you kill a rare mob, it should drop a yellow piece of loot, a rare drop. Similarly, every time you kill a boss, it should drop at least 2 to 3. At least 2 to 3. I think this is a no-brainer. Same thing goes for chests. So if you find a rare chest should always drop a rare piece of loot. It's simple as that. It feels really bad to spend 10 minutes killing a boss or whatever it may be, or a very long time killing a challenging boss. You're kind of sweating. You're like, that was sick. That boss fight was so cool. And then they drop nothing. That just feels horrible. I really think this is an easy solve. That being said, from GGG's perspective, I kind of understand starting low on the loot, because it is a lot easier to add loot than it is to take it away, right? Like, if they started way over the top and they were looking at this like, okay, wait a second, we may have overdone it. We're giving too much loot, which certainly could be a realistic problem, then pulling that back is a very tough pill for the player base to swallow. So I understand starting low, but it really does need to increase, and I think it needs to increase quickly to keep people engaged. The second thing is zones. So this goes to both maps and the campaign. In my opinion, zones need to be about half the size that they are now. and we need to add more checkpoints. The checkpoint system is so good. I love it. I wish it was in PoE 1. The checkpoint system is fantastic. Like, imagine dying in like a big linear map and it just had a checkpoint for you that you could portal back in. You still lose your portal, but you get a checkpoint. Like that's pretty cool. But it's being so underutilized in just so many zones. Some zones feel perfect. They've just added the exact right number of checkpoints, and some are like a checkpoint desert. Thinking of one in particular, there's the last zone in Act 2, before you get to the final boss of Act 2, is a very linear zone. And the zone has, you start at the beginning, you have a waypoint, that's first checkpoint. There's another checkpoint literally 10 seconds in, and then there's not another checkpoint for like 15 minutes of walking. Like it feels really, really weird. I think this is an easy solve, right? Like adding checkpoints and putting them in more places makes sense. But that being said, I feel like the zones are just way too big given how slowly we move. There's no movement skills. There's very limited access to movement speed in general on gear and in the passive tree. It does exist, but it's uncommon, particularly in the campaign. The zones are way too big. There are some zones that I'm actually walking around for 45 minutes trying to find like side quest things that I need to turn in or need to do. Like there's the Act 3 zones come to mind in particular. They're just way too big. It's something that we'll get the hang of more over time, but I'm still unconvinced that these zones need to be this large, and frankly, they need to have more stuff going on. So this leaning more towards maps now and the endgame system, maps are way too big with far too little going on. There's maybe like 3 to 7 rares in a map and a boss sometimes. Occasionally you'll get a league mechanic, right? Like if it's like preordained in the Atlas view, but it's just way too large with too little going on. And because rares in maps today are the primary source of loot, there just needs to be either way more rares or the maps need to be way smaller so I can get to the rares faster and get to the loot. Because right now I feel like I'm walking around a map for 20 plus minutes just killing random white mobs along the way and getting nothing. So, and looking for rares so I can complete the map, but then also the rares are where all the loot is. So it's just a really weird balance. The zones are way too big. There was actually one map that I really liked. It's called Savannah. It felt like the perfect size. It had the ones that I've done. It's had a good amount of rares. I don't know if that's like tied to the map at all, but either way, that Savannah map, that's the perfect size. Make that every size for every single map and every single zone. Perfect. Okay. Speaking of end game adjustments. So as a softcore enjoyer, someone who dies from time to time, don't /death me, there are a couple things that I think need to change with the end game maps. The first one is, and it was a concern I think going into PoE2, is the map portal count. So the way it works, for those who don't know, is you have 6 portals in your map, but you can only die once. The other portals are for zoning in, zoning out. If you need to do a trade or you need to drop off loot or whatever it may be, or you DC, you can use one of those portals to get back in, but you can only die once. And if you die once, you lose the map, and you can do that zone again, but you lose the extra stuff on it. So let's say that zone had an expedition on it. You lose the expedition, but you do get to run that map again, and you need to complete that map to progress the path. So unless you want to take a different route, then you have to kill that, you have to complete that zone. So the map portal count of 1 feels a little tight to me. I can understand, in theory, not wanting to do 6 because it feels like you can just kind of you can just kind of brute force your way through the Atlas, but maybe like 2, maybe 3, just like so it's not so punishing if you just get one tapped by someone who's in like a mob who's in a room that you can't really see. Like I've so many times I've like turned a corner and just gotten shotgunned and I die and I lose the map, and I'm just like, well, okay, like, could I have played it slightly more cautiously and potentially dodged that? Yes, absolutely. But that being said, like, it still feels really bad to have to just get, like, progression is so stagnated because of that. I just really wish that I had, like, an extra portal. And people might call me bad, and that's fine, but this is my video. And I want an extra portal, at least. So that's one thing. Second thing, the towers. So the lost towers that, like, essentially illuminate the map, that is a very poorly designed zone. You're walking through these like, basically it's like islands. So it's like one tower with like a bridge and then another tower. But the thing is, you can't see into the towers because you have to take a step in for the ceiling to remove itself. So you can't actually see the mobs. So you basically take a step in and just get destroyed, just like trying to get in. Again, perhaps get good. But that being said, it feels like bad map design to me if the only way I can tell what's in a room is if I face check it. I don't know. That just feels weird. And I don't like these zones. And frankly, they just don't feel like they add all that much. So I would say just chop the roof off those things. That's a good start. But in general, I don't love those. Second thing is, generally speaking, there's a lot of very, very narrow maps that make it kind of difficult to maneuver. And again, it requires a lot of face checking. So I probably could have combined these into one point. But the face checking meta for like seeing what's there before I can actually start dropping down attacks, because I'm playing Arc right now. I can't just like throw Arc into like a room because I have to connect with something. So if I'm just like spitting it into the middle and the mobs are actually slightly off to the right, I'm not killing anything, and then I have to face check it. Like there's no way around it. So it just feels a little bit weird with these very, very narrow maps where they can just shotgun you down, and because we're trying to dodge roll back, like they can just hit you down this hallway regardless. It just feels bad. So that's the primary end game adjustments that I would make there. The next thing is the passive tree. There's a lot of like weird quirks with the passive tree that it's kind of hard to articulate, but there's some points that just feel really, really unnecessarily difficult to get to. Like they're weirdly hidden. The passive tree is very thematic and it looks cool, but functionally it just feels a little weird for some of these nodes. I also feel like the passive tree is kind of lacking in a little bit of power. I feel like the passive tree needs to go up about like 10% in power level across the board. Like a lot of nodes just feel like they don't do all that much. Like I level up and I don't feel like I'm getting all that much stronger. The keystones, not the keystones, the notables oftentimes have like weird downsides. I don't really understand. So I think the passive tree just needs, frankly, to be rethought. And a lot of new pathways need to be crafted to make it a little easier to get to things, because as it is right now, it just feels kind of strange when you level up from my perspective. Once you get to a certain point, like there's a lot of like low-hanging fruit points, but from there, like the passives just start to kind of fall off. Like I'm level in the 70s and it's just, I don't know. It just feels like really, really lacking in power at that point. The next thing is Ascendancy Trials. I don't know how the Ascendancy Trials have made it into the game as they are. They are horrible, horrible, top to bottom. Sanctum is horrible. Ultimatum is worse. Having to do this for my lab is painful. Please, please just bring back regular lab at this point, because I cannot run Sanctum and Ultimatum to do my Ascendancy Trials. It's horrible. I cannot emphasize this enough. This needs to be completely rethought. This sounds like it was probably something that it's a cool idea, and I agreed. Like when they announced it, I was like, that's a cool idea. It's good, like recontextualization of these mechanics. But in practice, it is so unfun. I don't know a single person who enjoys this. So please make some dramatic changes here. Rethink this completely. Rebalance it completely. It's just not fun. So moving on. The next thing is this is a small one. There are a couple of things that are in the nitpicky stage, and this is one of them. There's some various UI quirks, like things like when you have to like kill a campaign notable boss, like the difference between them being completed and not is like them being basically slightly grayed out or not, and the skulls are already white. It's just weird. There's some like various UI things that just don't make sense. Like the waypoint system just feels a little bit weird. There's a lot of bugs with the waypoint system. I don't know. GGG I feel like has always kind of struggled, in my opinion, with UI. Like every time they implement like a new league, there's always some like weird roundabout UI issue that's being caused. Like things just don't look right and they become a little bit like functionally difficult. I feel like the UIs overall could kind of use a little bit more love, because it feels like I have to do some like very roundabout things to get where I want to go with the UI. So some small things, but hard to like pinpoint them, but they're kind of like little things all over the place that just feel weird. The next thing is support gems. So support gems in general, I like the gem system overall. I think it's a really strong addition to PoE2, but support gems just kind of feel like, because they don't level, they feel very static. I also think that we just frankly need a lot more of them. Like I feel like I'm kind of like pigeonholed into just a few options. That sandbox-esque nature of PoE1 with support gems feels a little bit lost. Granted, obviously in PoE1, there's very much like the best support gems for sure. And I feel like PoE2, we're very much still in the experimenting stage. But that being said, there's something that just feels like support gems they're not adding that oomph like I feel they do in PoE 1. I don't, it's again, hard one to put into words, but I just feel like the support gem system just doesn't feel good in interacting with. The skill gem system I like, but support gems maybe could use a little bit of love. The next thing is respec costs. So particularly in the campaign, respec costs are far too high. If you make a mistake or you decide you don't like something, or something is just not working, or the skill is just bad, you are really screwed. The gold cost for respecing is just like literally 5x too high. We shouldn't be punishing people for wanting to respec in the campaign. Full stop. We don't get any respec points along the way like we do in PoE 1. PoE 1, I can't remember the exact number, but you get enough to play with to know that if you make a mistake for like 5, 10 plus points, you're kind of covered by the end of the campaign. But in PoE 2, you don't get any of that. So it's all purely gold, and the gold cost is just way too high. This is an easy thing to tweak. Just bring it down, and that'll solve the problem. Next thing is enemy action speed. So because we're so slow, enemies feel incredibly fast. Enemy movement speed on some mob types is just far too high. Like I feel like I'm constantly dodge rolling backwards. I literally have no time to attack because they are like actually jumping on me at light speed. The werewolf mobs come to mind. They're way too quick. Some of these like the wasp mobs fly in at light speed and land on me. Like it's just far too fast. I think enemy action speed overall could use like a slight tune down, but there's some mobs in particular that just are so fucking fast. It's just completely, I just have literally no time to attack. And I feel like I'm just like on the back foot 100% of the time. And it's not really like fun. It doesn't feel challenging. It just feels unfair. And that's not like the type of challenge I think they want. They want it to be a challenge that I feel like I can overcome. And while this is, of course you can kill these mobs. It's not like they're immortal or anything. It just feels like they're cheating, more or less. And that's not really a good feeling. The next thing is, again, more nitpicky. There are several rare mods that should not exist in PoE 2. The biggest one, in my opinion, being Flask Siphon. With how important flasks seem to feel, especially in the early part of the game, Flask Siphoner is just a non-mod. Like, why does this exist? It's completely ridiculous. The second thing is invulnerability. I hated this in PoE 1. I hated it in PoE 2. I especially with how strong like non-rare mobs are in PoE 2, them just suddenly becoming immune is not fun, and it makes it's really like the counterplay to that is just run. And like, I don't know, that's not particularly fun. So I think it's a no-go. The next one is this new proximal tangibility, I think it's called. Certainly we could have phrased that differently. There's no visual indicator to know what this means. Mobs just walk around and take no damage until you stand right next to them. Like perhaps there could be some kind of visual indication there if we're going to keep that in the game. I've never really liked those sort of proximity-based mods, but if we're going to keep it, there needs to be some kind of visual indication there. And the last thing is the well. Why does the well exist? Completely pointless. Just make it so when you go back to town, your flasks and health automatically refill. There's no need to have a well there. I understand wanting to keep flask charges kind of lower in terms of killing things. So that way, your flasks feel impactful. I completely understand that, and I like it for this game. But the well is a completely pointless mechanic. I should just always refill the second I go to town. There's no reason for the well to exist. Anyway, that is it for me. Again, overall, I'm having a really great time with PoE 2, but there are a lot of things that do need to change, in my opinion. And because we're in early access, let's do it. Let's make these changes, and let's suggest them to GGG so they can hear them. And I will say one last thing before I close this video out, which has proven to be longer than I was expecting it to be, and that is, I see a lot of comments on Reddit and YouTube, and basically people who are like giving legitimate criticisms of PoE 2. Even people who really like PoE 2 are providing criticism, and I feel like a lot of the comments I'm seeing are, there's always PoE 1, just go back to PoE 1, go back to D4. Like, that doesn't really help at all. I think you're actively hurting PoE 2 by making comments like that, because essentially you're stymieing any kind of legitimate criticism that will improve the game. Just telling people to get good or go back to PoE 1/D4 is like a terrible, terrible approach. So hear people out. Like, let them speak their criticism. Oftentimes, it will be legitimate, and you might even agree with some of it. So let's have a nice conversation in the comments. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with my stuff? Do you think I'm an idiot? Let me know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, guys, and I will see you in the next one.